You're listening to The Ben Shapiro Show on AM 770 KTTH.
Hey, and welcome. This is The Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com. If you'd like to be a part of the program today, our number, 800-465-8770, 800-465-8770. Well, we have a jam-packed show, as always, for you today. Everything from controversy engulfing famed actor Gary Oldman in Hollywood to controversy engulfing Seattle City Light. Yet another controversy surrounding Jorge Carrasco, the CEO of City Light, who just got a $60,000 raise, and a big Supreme Court decision coming down as well. So we'll get to all of that, but we start today with a spate of primaries that have made a fair bit of news, and for pretty good reason. The first primary was a primary in Mississippi, and this is a primary between a guy named Thad Cochran, who is the incumbent senator from Mississippi, and a guy named Chris McDaniel, who's a state senator from Mississippi. McDaniel was the Tea Party candidate, and Cochran was the establishment candidate. When I say establishment versus Tea Party, this is one of the few cases in which there was a legit split between the establishment and the Tea Party. Thad Cochran was backed by Michael Bloomberg. Thad Cochran was backed by, I believe, the Bush family. Thad Cochran was backed by the Republican National Committee, is my understanding. And by contrast, his opponent, Chris McDaniel, was backed by Ted Cruz and Sarah Palin and a bunch of Tea Party stalwarts. So it was a very close competition, very, very close race. McDaniel ended up losing by a very slight margin in this nail-biting race. With 99.9% of the precincts reporting, Cochran beat McDaniel 50.8% to 49.2%. They were separated by about 6,300 votes out of more than 375,000 cast. Cochran relied on boosting voter turnout in the runoff, not only among Republicans, but among black Democrats. They were courted faithfully throughout the final days of the campaign. And this in and of itself has led to a pretty substantial amount of controversy. Cochran said last night, "We all have a right to be proud of our state tonight. This is your victory." McDaniel was a little bit less forthcoming in his praise for the race. McDaniel said that he would not be conceding the race. He actually did ended up conceding. But here's what McDaniel had to say after losing his race in close fashion to a guy who has voted in favor of immigration reform, to a guy who has voted in favor of crony capitalism, and to a guy who's brought home a fair bit of pork, aside from which he lives in the basement of his executive assistant, who happens to be his girlfriend.
There is something a bit strange. There is something a bit unusual about a Republican primary that's decided by liberal Democrats. So much for bold colors. So much for principle. I guess they can take some consolation in the fact that they did something tonight by once again compromising, by once again reaching across the aisle, by once again abandoning the conservative movement. I would like to know which part of that strategy today our Republican friends endorse.
And McDaniel has a great point here. He really does. One of the flyers that went around in the late stages of the campaign was a flyer that was put out by friends of Thad Cochran, and it said this. It said, it was mainly distributed in heavily black areas in Mississippi. It said, quote, "The Tea Party intends to prevent blacks from voting on Tuesday." Okay, this was put out presumably by Republicans. The Tea Party intends to prevent blacks from voting on Tuesday. When establishment Republicans and racist Democrats join hands to slander the Tea Party as a racist group, we've got a problem. The flyer says, according to the Clarion Ledger, Chris McDaniel and the Tea Party plan to prevent quote-unquote Democrats voting in the Senate runoff on Tuesday between Thad Cochran and Tea Party candidate Chris McDaniel. We know the Tea Party uses Democrats as code for African Americans. Don't be intimidated by the Tea Party. Let's turn out for all Mississippians and vote for Thad Cochran. Cochran indeed was boosted to victory by a late black turnout, heavy black turnout. According to the New York Times today, a surge of voters showed up on Tuesday in African-American precincts and in Mr. Cochran's other strongholds to surprise Mr. McDaniel. Mr. Cochran's victory was powered in part by African-Americans in areas of North Jackson, whose turnout shattered that scene in those precincts in the primary. Turnout jumped fivefold at the New Hope Baptist Church, sevenfold at Green Elementary School, where only 14 voters came out on June 3rd, but about 100 showed up on Tuesday. Their high numbers came despite pledges by conservative political action committees to monitor turnouts in Democratic areas targeted by Cochran's campaign. Both the NAACP and the Justice Department expressed concerns about the intimidation of black Democrats. I love this. I love that the Department of Justice expresses no concerns about Black Panthers standing outside polling places in 2008 wielding batons to intimidate voters. But they express concerns about the monitoring of Democrats voting in Republican primaries. No irregularities have been reported to Mississippi election officials. The state does not have any party registration. Anybody could vote in the Republican runoff who had not voted in the Democratic primary. McDaniel was, again, fighting mad, as he should be.
I would like to know which part of that strategy our statewide officials endorse. This is not the party of Reagan. But we're not done fighting. And when we're done, it will be. We have fought too long. We have fought too hard to have a voice in this party. And today, the conservative movement took a back seat to liberal Democrats in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, we did.
In the most conservative state in the republic, this happened. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And that's why we will never stop fighting.
Well, he is stopping the fight. He is not challenging the election results. CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash said the Democrats are the ones who put Thad Cochran over the top.
Another thing that I will point out, and just in all candor, the Cochran people here are saying that if this was just a truly Republican race, if the law here in Mississippi did not allow Democrats to vote, then he probably, almost certainly, would be losing to Chris McDaniel.
Ted Cruz, who's an endorser of Chris McDaniel, he put a lot of blame on the Republican Party. He said it's amazing that the GOP encouraged Democrats to vote in Mississippi simply to keep a Tea Party guy out.
Well, I didn't have a position in the Mississippi race. I from the beginning this year, have stayed out of all incumbent races. But I do think it's striking that the race was so close that it took, you saw the Washington Republican establishment put millions of dollars into that race to preserve an incumbent. And they encouraged an awful lot of Democrats to vote in that race and won a razor-thin race. I think that demonstrates that there's a lot of hunger for change. People are frustrated with Washington, and they're hungry for leaders who will stand up and make the case we need to go a different path. I certainly congratulate my colleague Thad. I congratulate James Lankford on their wins. And I'm hopeful that we'll see every Republican in Washington standing together to stand up to this failed Obama agenda that has taken the country in the wrong direction.
So once again, rifts exposed inside the Republican Party, rifts that didn't have to take place. Chris McDaniel is not a bad candidate. Chris McDaniel is not Christine O'Donnell or Todd Akin, and despite all attempts to paint him that way, he simply is not that guy. It is disreputable for the establishment Republican Party to look outside the party to Democrats. What's hilarious, of course, is that the same establishment people who decried the victory of Christine O'Donnell in Delaware over Mike Castle back in that Senate primary, those same people who said that Democrats crossed party lines to vote for O'Donnell were encouraging Democrats to cross party lines to vote for Thad Cochran in this race. Well, last I checked, Christine O'Donnell was not reaching out to Democrats, but Thad Cochran certainly was. And not only that, it now appears that allies of Thad Cochran were calling the Tea Party racist in order to accomplish their goals. That's certainly bad news for the Republican Party, and it's certainly bad news for the Tea Party. Now, the other big primary race that happened yesterday was a race in Harlem, in New York, between 22-term incumbent Charlie Rangel, who is now, I believe, 86 years old, or 80, I think he's 88 years old, maybe. He's now been in Congress for 44 years, so 14 years longer than I have been alive. Charlie Rangel has been in Congress. He was running against a Hispanic guy who was supposed to be a pretty close challenger. It looks like he will win that race, although it was too close to call as of this morning. They've pretty much conceded that he has won the race. Well, when we come back here on the Ben Shapiro Show, I will play you the catchy little ditty that put Charlie Rangel over the top in his district. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770, KTTH, KTTH.com. So as I mentioned before the break, Charlie Rangel, the Democrat congressperson from Harlem, who has been censured by the Congress of the United States for corruption. He's been repeatedly investigated for corruption. It appears that he has now won his primary race against an up-and-coming Hispanic politician in his district. His district had been redistricted, and that had put him in a difficult position against Dominican-born challenger Adriano Espaillat and African-American pastor Michael Walrond. He's, I guess, 84 years old. I said he was 86. He's 84 years old. Rangel said that he was not disappointed that President Obama had not come to campaign for him. He then went around, apparently during this campaign, and portrayed himself as Obama's apostle, put on earth to protect Harlem and the president from those white, awful Southern Republicans. That, according to Politico magazine, which is not a particularly anti-Obama or anti-Rangel publication. Rangel said, and he has a very distinctive voice, "They hate the president. God sent us Barack Obama. These people carry hate in their heart. All of them come from states that used to hold Africans as slaves." Have you noticed that race baiting has now become the common theme between Thad Cochran's campaign, Tea Partiers are racists, and the campaign of Charlie Rangel, everybody who's not me is a racist? This has now become the common theme, and this is, I think, the death of American politics. If we have nothing in common, if we don't even know for whom we're voting, all we care about is that the people on the other side of the aisle are allegedly a bunch of slave-holding racists, with no evidence that that is the case, then we've got a serious problem. The only way that a democracy or a republic can work is if the basic idea is that the majority is not going to violate the minority's rights. And the only way that you can have that is if there is a basic agreement between the minority and the majority as to what liberty constitutes. That certainly no longer exists here in the United States. Half the country believes that it is incumbent upon them to relieve the other half of their liberties, which are used for intolerance and bigotry. When you have folks like Charlie Rangel sitting in Congress for 4 decades, shouting things like, all of them hated Abe Lincoln, all of them really think that the Civil War is not over. That's bad news. Well, Charlie Rangel had to pander to his constituency. He needed heavy black turnout in order to win. And that meant that he had to release a rap song to turn out his base. Think of whom this is targeted to. I'm going to say it's not targeted to the well-informed voter in Charlie Rangel's district. I'm just going to put that out.
I don't know about y'all, man, but I'm turning all the way up now. We vote for Charles Rangel. We support Charles Rangel all the way. Y'all better do the same thing. Go out and vote. Spy Boy LD and Darn Swag.
This is an actual campaign song. Actual campaign song for Charlie Rangel in his district.
If you gonna vote, you gonna vote for the Rangel. Charlie Rangel. If you gonna vote, you gonna vote for the Rangel. Charlie Rangel. Charlie for the Rangel. If you gonna vote, Charlie Rangel.
Do you feel more informed yet? Do you feel more informed? Well, don't worry, you will be. This is actually an encyclopedic rap song. Charlie Rangel's entire biography told in the music of the streets, according to John Kerry. Charlie Rangel rap continues.
You know Charlie? He was born in Harlem, got a purple.
Do you know Charlie? He was born in Harlem. He got a Purple Heart from the Army.